All right, welcome. Thank you for tuning in and watching today's recording. I was hoping to record this yesterday on Wednesday, but lo and behold, here we are Thursday morning. I'd like to apologize for not being able to give a live share, a live class, as I usually would on Wednesdays. And this is going to be a second best. So it's going to be put up on YouTube, hopefully later today. And I hope that you enjoyed this class as much as I did when I was preparing it. If you would like to sponsor today's or a future class in honor of whatever it might be, birthday, celebration, or some sort, please reach out to me, rabbi@jewisherie.com, or give me a call, 814-315-1344. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank those who did and do support what we do here in Erie. And thank you for giving Jews in Erie the opportunity to connect with their heritage and to learn. Also, as well, if you'd like to get a copy of today's curriculum for the class, you might want to pause right now and send me an email, and I'll get to that to you as ASAP. L'chaim, somebody got me this very interesting chocolate drink. It's very interesting. But it is kosher. There's a kosher symbol on it. Chaf K, can't really see that. And I already made a blessing. L'chaim. Okay, let's get into this. Explosive potential. The golden calf, the translation of the Torah, and Shammai's power grab. A historical journey through dramatic moments in our past with a bold message for the present. It's actually quite an explosive class. We're gonna zone in on a statement from our sages, which seems to be a little odd, but as we go into this deeper, we'll see the incredible precision and depth to the words of Torah in general, the words of our sages. In this week's Torah reading, Parshat Devarim, we learn how Moses translated the Torah. This leads us to the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Torah, produced by 70 elders of the Jewish people for King, I might be pronouncing this wrong, but I'm going to pronounce it how I'm going to pronounce it, for King Ptolemy in Egypt, and the issues translations raise. Are translations a good thing, or can they lead to negative outcomes? A gripping historic journey following the Jews of the desert, Ptolemy, Hillel and Shammai, the Baal Shem Tov, and the previous Rebbe, and the surprising thing that they all had in common. Today's class is based off of a talk given by the Rebbe in the wintertime of 1980, 1979, and also from the Rebbe's Likutei Sichot, volume 24, page 2 and on, and a few other places as well. Okay. Section A, if you're following the book, is page 3. A wild comparison. Moses' translation of the Torah. We read about something fascinating in this week's Torah reading, a historic translation of the Torah by Moses. So see source 1, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 3-5. It came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first of the month, Moses spoke to the children of Israel following all that God had commanded him regarding them. After he had smitten Sichon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon, and Og, king of the Bashan, who dwelt in Ashtaroth in Edrei. On that side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, keywords right here, Moses commenced, or he began, explaining the Torah. What does explaining the Torah mean? What have we been doing for the past 40 years in the desert, since the giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai? Explaining the Torah, teaching the Torah. What does explaining the Torah mean? So Rashi, the famous commentator who we mentioned many times, he explains, explaining the Torah means he explained it in 70 languages, or he translated it into 70 languages. That's the story in this week's Torah portion. And clearly it's seen as a positive thing. It's mentioned as a matter of fact, and it's something positive that Moses did. Okay. About 989 years later, the Torah was officially or unofficially translated a second time. But let's hear the story about that. Ptolemy's translation. In the year 3477 on the Jewish calendar, Ptolemy became the king of Egypt. He appreciated culture, science, and the arts, and maintained close ties with the learned Jews of his land. As someone who appreciated knowledge and wanting to appease the Jews, he decided to do something special and commission a translation of the Torah into Greek. Ptolemy had the largest library of his day, containing the works of the philosophers and wise men of the ages. Shouldn't his library also have a copy of the Torah, the Jewish Torah? Ptolemy turned to Eleazar the high priest and requested that he send him the greatest Jewish scholars. The high priest selected 72 sages and sent them to Egypt. Ptolemy put them each into separate rooms so they wouldn't be able to collaborate, and asked them to translate the Torah into Greek. It took a long time, but at the end, when Ptolemy compared each translation, they were identical word for word, miraculously. On the 8th of the month of Teves, the translation was completed. It is known as the Septuagint in English, or Greek, I don't know what language, after the 70 sages who worked on it. Septuagint comes from the word, I know somebody in the community who could probably explain this to me. You know who you are. After 70 sages who worked on it. Okay. Let's read that was a background and an explanation of the story, but let's read the story as it's written in what's known as the Tractate Sofrim, chapter 1, where it will end off with a line that's going to be very perplexing. Ptolemy gathered 72, this is source 2. He gathered 72 elders and sat them in 72 different rooms without telling them why he gathered them. He went to each one and told them, "Write for me the Torah of Moses, your teacher." God granted insight to each of them, and they all produced an identical translation of the Torah. And we'll see soon what exactly that means, that they produce an identical translation. They changed 13 things, including God created in the beginning, which is the first verse of the Torah. And God said, "I will make man with a form and image." And again, we'll see soon what this is talking about. Here's the line. Listen closely. That day was as difficult for the Jews as the day the golden calf was made, because the Torah can't be translated adequately. It's as difficult for the Jewish people as the day the golden calf was made? The golden calf? What was the golden calf? We left Egypt. We spent 49 days preparing ourselves physically and, more importantly, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually for the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, literally the greatest event in human history. The Torah is given to the Jewish people. The Jewish people are on the highest point they've ever been and ever will be, technically. Relatively moments later, it's a couple weeks, they crash to literally the lowest descent possible. They make a golden calf, and many people serve this calf as an idol. These sages translating the Torah into Greek is as difficult for the Jewish people as the day the golden calf was made. What does that mean? Let's see in the Rebbe's words, page 4. How can it be that just because the Torah can be translated perfectly, the translation is considered such a terrible event to the extent that it is compared to the creation of the golden calf? This translation was made by the elders and sages of the Jewish people, and they had divine assistance in the process. The reason the Talmud gives that, quote, the Torah can't be translated adequately is insufficient to justify comparing it to the day of the creation of the golden calf. Says the Rebbe, I haven't yet seen that any of the commentators address this question. So the Rebbe poses the obvious question, what is so terrible about translating the Torah into Greek? Yes, the Talmud identifies the issue, an issue, that the Torah can't be translated properly. Translation can never be perfect, but can it be really compared to the golden calf? Moving on, we're going to find another story, seemingly totally different story, about a completely different topic, where the sages use the same expression. And it's going to be, the Rebbe is going to present us a running theme. What is the common denominator in each story, which makes them, as these events, as difficult as the day the golden calf was made, and which will bring us to the core of this discussion. The victory of Beit Hillel over Beit Shammai. The same expression, like the day of the creation of the golden calf, is found in the Talmud tractate of Shabbos. So before we even get to that statement in the tractate Shabbos, we're going to see who are these Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, this Academy of Shammai, this Academy of Hillel, and what is the dynamic between the two of them? And this is going to be from tractate Eruvin. If those who are keeping score at home, it's Eruvin, page 13, side B. Hillel and Shammai lived in the 1st century and led the Jewish people living in Israel. Hillel was the head of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, and Shammai was his deputy. With time, each established a academy or a school of their own, groups of students who studied with them and learned to follow their way of understanding the spirit of their rulings. In the many disagreements between them, the school of Hillel, known as Beit Hillel, is usually more lenient, and the school of Shammai, Beit Shammai, tends to be more strict, with a few notable exceptions. Almost always, the final consensus follows Beit Hillel. It's an important rule. Let's see it inside. Page 4. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Shmuel, for 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel argued. Beit Shammai said that the law should follow them, and Beit Hillel said it should follow them. Ultimately, a heavenly voice rang out. Both opinions are the word of the living God, and the halacha, the final say, what we actually do practically, follows Beit Hillel. If both schools are, continues the Talmud, if both schools are the word of the living God, why does the halacha follow Beit Hillel? Because the students of Hillel were pleasant to others and humble. When Beit Hillel would teach, they would also cite Beit Shammai's rulings and even cite it before their own. So the final ruling doesn't follow Beit Hillel in deference to the heavenly voice. That's not why we follow Beit Hillel. The law follows the majority opinion in the academy. When there is a debate, the ruling follows the majority. It's a Torah rule. Acharei rabim lahatos. We follow the majority. It would seem, however, that the heavenly voice had some influence in persuading the majority of sages to follow Beit Hillel. One day, however, something extraordinary happened. The majority of sages present at the academy were from Beit Shammai, and that day the final ruling followed Beit Shammai. Very uncommon occurrence. It was at a contentious meeting in the attic of the home of Rabbi Hanania ben Chizkiah, and the students of Hillel and Shammai engaged in a debate. When the vote was counted, it was Beit Shammai who was found to be the majority. 18 rabbinic rulings were issued that day, mostly on ritual purity matters concerning the gifts given to the priests, but also regarding wine, bread, and oil of Gentiles. That day's events are recounted in the Talmud. Let's see it inside Tractate Shabbat, Shabbos, page 13, side B, and also page 17, side A. Says the Mishnah over there, this is page 5 in your book. These are the laws which were said in the attic of Rabbi Hanania ben Chizkiah ben Garon, when the sages went to visit him. They counted, and the students of Shammai were more than the students of Hillel. They adjudicated, or they finalized 18 laws that day. Says the Gemara, says the Talmud, they placed a sword at the entrance of the academy and said, one who wishes to enter, let him enter. One who wishes to exit may not exit. That day, Hillel bowed before Shammai like the other students. Hillel bowed before Shammai like the other students. Get this part. It was as difficult for the Jews as the day the golden calf was made. In Hebrew, there's a phrase, Pile ployim. This is a shocker. What's going on over here? Says the Rebbe, how can this event be compared to the golden calf? Here, too, we need an explanation for how this day can be termed so difficult for the Jewish people that is compared to the day of the creation of the golden calf. Shammai was a great person, a huge sage. The depth of his mind we can't fathom. Both Hillel and Shammai were students of Shmaya and of Talion. Beit Hillel were even particular to mention Beit Shammai's opinions before their own, as we just learned. So what is so terrible about Hillel sitting submissively before Shammai like one of his students? And to the extent that this is compared to the day of the creation of the golden calf. This wasn't a hostile takeover of the academy by an outside entity. It was just a group of sages on that day constituted the majority, and the ruling followed them. Why is it being compared to the golden calf? Shammai was Hillel's peer, and they studied together with the same teachers. Moreover, we learn that Hillel's students studied the opinions of Shammai and respected their opinions. How could it be, after all this tolerance, one day Hillel loses the majority and it's declared that this day was as tragic as the golden calf? Now, we said we respected their opinions. It's not like nowadays people say, I respect your opinion, but I politely disagree with you and you're wrong. And it's just all external and superficial. The respecting the other opinion is not really truly respect. The students of Hillel truly respected Beit Shammai's opinions, even mentioning it before their own. So what's going on over here? What is going on over here? How can these three different things, did I say three? Torah's translation and two things. Sorry, these two seemingly non-connected events of the translation of the Torah into Greek and Hillel sitting submissively before Shammai. How could these both events be compared to the day the golden calf was made? It just doesn't seem logical. So the Rebbe, with his incredible wisdom, is going to analyze this and bring out the juice, bring out the depth, the core ideas here. What are the sages telling us? And what messages do these teachings carry? And the Rebbe is going to analyze the fact that the phrase that the sages used, is very meticulous, very exact. They did not say that this event, or whatever it was as difficult for the Jewish people as the golden calf. Rather, it was as difficult as the day of the making of the golden calf. Is there a difference? There's a major difference. Let's see it inside. B, dangerous potential. This is page 6 in your book. These are the Rebbe's words, slippery slope to idolatry. To explain this, we first need to highlight a detail of the wording used here. In both passages, the Talmud terms the events discussed as, quote, like the day of the creation of the golden calf, rather than comparing it to the sin of the creation of the golden calf itself. Well, creation is not the right word here. Sorry. So comparing it to the sin of the golden calf itself. Following a simple reading of the Torah's account, the day on which the golden calf was worshipped was the day following the day of its creation. The verse states that on the day of the creation of the calf, Aaron, Moses' brother, the high priest, said, tomorrow will be a celebration for God. By this, he was trying to stall for time, as he was convinced that Moses would return the next day and everyone would serve God alone. The main part of the sin of the golden calf occurred on the following day. They rose early the next day and raised sacrifices. On this note, Nachmanides, the Ramban, explains that Moses was not told, quote, go down, for your people have become corrupted, on the day Aaron created the calf. That's not when Hashem told him that, but only on the following day, when the people brought sacrifices to it and prostrated, they bowed down before it. So the day the golden calf was made, Moses was on Mount Sinai, studying Torah from God. Nothing changed. Only the next day, when the Jews began worshiping the calf, Hashem said, go down, for your people have become corrupted. So it turns out that on the day it was fashioned, it had not been used for idol worship. So we're seeing this difference between the creation of the golden calf, or the day of the creation of the golden calf, and the sin of serving the golden calf. They're two different things. We have to figure out what this distinction is. But before we go further, seemingly there's a problem here. Even if it's not serving an idol, but making an idol, seemingly something wrong. They're making an idol. They're making this calf, which was served the next day. That's a problem, no? The answer is not necessarily. Let's see the Rebbe's word, page 7. The Jews sought a connection with God. What is the nature of this golden calf, by the way? Let's see. The commentators discuss at length the reasoning behind the sin of the golden calf. Why did the Jewish people make this thing in the first place? The Jewish people were not looking for idolatry, God forbid. They were looking for a leader to replace Moses, not a substitute for God. This is expressed in their statement, we don't know what has happened to Moses, the person who took us out of Egypt, and therefore let's make this calf. In other words, they were seeking an intermediary, a middleman, to stand between them and God. This was seemingly in accordance with the system God himself instituted, in which Moses is described as, quote, the person who took us out of Egypt. The exodus from Egypt is not attributed to God directly, but to Moses, who served as the conduit between Hashem and the Jewish people. So the Jews didn't suddenly decide on the 40th day after receiving the Torah to worship idols. It wasn't they woke up one day, let's serve fake gods. They weren't demanding a new God. They only wanted a replacement for Moses. Moses was the intermediary who connected them to God. After he disappeared on the mountain, they wanted a new intermediary. For some reason, they figured that an animal intermediary, and one made of gold, would be better than a person. There's a Kabbalistic explanation for this, but we're not going to get into it. Says the Rebbe, continuing, even after the calf had been created, but before it had been worshipped, Aaron was still hoping for a celebration for God tomorrow. He was hoping that this episode would result in spiritual improvement when Moses would come and the Jewish people would realize that the idea of a calf was worthless. This would further express divine oneness. It would be a positive thing afterwards, that there is none other than God, and the only one capable of serving as an intermediary is Moses, who was appointed by God and sent as his messenger to the Jewish people. Moses was a conduit for connection, not an intermediary who separates. Pause for a second. Even after they fashioned the calf, Aaron still hoped that the next day would be a day of celebration for God. How? He hoped that Moses would come down from the mountain earlier and be able to explain to the Jews that they're making a little bit of a mistake. Only God can choose an intermediary, nobody else. It's not something that they can do on their own. Then everything would have worked out. Not only would the Jews not commit idol worship, they'd also learn an important lesson in faith, that an intermediary is only chosen by God. So, if that's the case, that idol worship, what they did the next day was the worst thing. They served an idol. And what happened the previous day, that they made this calf, seemingly wasn't so bad. What was the problem? What was so bad about this day that we'll call it comparing things to it was as difficult for the Jews as the day the golden calf was made? What was the problem? Says the Rebbe, page 8. However, the actual outcome the next day was the sin of the golden calf, which some Jews worshipped as a form of idolatry, contrary to the principle of divine oneness. The difficult matter on, quote, the day the golden calf was created, not the day in which it was actually worshipped, was that it contained, here's the key, the potential to lead to the sin of idolatry. So in short, the problem of the day the golden calf was made was the potential for it to become an idol, not the idol worship itself. So when the sages tell us that this or this event was as difficult for the Jewish people as the day the golden calf was made, nothing bad happened the day the golden calf was made. They made a golden calf. They were trying to replace Moses. They thought it was a good idea. They didn't have any negative intentions at all. The next day, eventually, it turned into idol worship. But day one, where the calf wasn't worshipped, left room. It left potential for that to happen the next day. This is the key. When we compare something to the day the day the golden calf was made, we're saying this event contains something potentially destructive. Just as the day the golden calf was made, where the calf itself wasn't something wrong, but it had potential to lead to something absolutely destructive. Let's weave it in and see how we see this in these two events. Potentially dangerous translation. Continue on page 8. The Rebbe says, the same is true regarding the Greek translation of the Torah and the sages made for Talmud. The teaching that states that the Torah can't be translated adequately means that there can't be any precise literal translation of the Torah, preserving the original Hebrew structure and grammar. The problem is that this creates the possibility for erroneous conclusions by its readers. So let's analyze the changes the sages made to kind of circumvent an issue which would arise by translating the Torah literally. Source 5, page 9, Tractate Sofrim. In order to understand this potential issue, we're going to examine the two divinely inspired changes the sages made to the translation. Remember, the Talmud tells us, this Tractate Sofrim tells us that they made 13 changes. Let's analyze two of them. God created in the beginning. In order not to give the impression, meaning that was one change they made, in order not to give the impression that, quote, beginning, unquote, is a divine name and that there are two divine powers. Had they translated the Torah literally, it would read, beginning created God. This is one of those plugs for, we should all try to better our Hebrew understanding and Hebrew reading skills, because there's certain things that it's difficult to understand them without understanding how Hebrew works. This, for example, in the Hebrew, the first three words of the Torah, the first verse in the Torah is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the first verse. The literal translation of the first three words, the reading is Bereshit bara Elokim, which means in the beginning God created. But if you were to translate those words absolutely 100% literally, it would translate into English as in the beginning created God. Now, for people like Talmud and people of his time who not necessarily were so monotheistic, on the contrary, they would see this as an opening to say, oh, there's God number one. His name is beginning. Bereshit. He created Elohim. He created God. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. to say such a thing. But this is what the mistake that they would make. In order to prevent this mistake, they edited the translation. It wasn't a perfectly accurate translation, but the theme, the content was true. It retained its truth, that God created in the beginning. Second thing they changed was, the verse says, Na'ase Adam b'tzalmenu kidmusenu. Before God creates Adam, the very first man, the verse says that God says, literally translated as, let us create man in our image and our divine, let us create man. They translated as, I will make man. I will make man, they wrote, not as is written, let us make man, in order to prevent Ptolemy from thinking that there are two divine powers. So if they would literally translate, let us make man, Ptolemy would have erred in thinking that there are multiple divine beings who are making man together. He may not have accepted, and he probably wouldn't have accepted, Rashi's explanation that God was speaking to the angels, and in his humility, he considered them partners in creation. Thus, they wrote, I will make man in the singular form. Rashi explains that God was not asking other gods or let's taking their advice, let's make a man together. God forbid, there's only one God. Rashi explains that God was speaking to the angels. And in his humility, he was, so to speak, asking their advice. And we see later on when Hashem actually makes Adam, the verse doesn't say that they made Adam, it says he made Adam. But Ptolemy would have scrolled over that. Okay. Idolatrous potential. Says the Rebbe, when a non-Jew like Ptolemy would later study a perfectly precise translation of the Torah into Greek, he wouldn't be able to understand various passages and could even reach an understanding completely opposite of the intended one. This is why God assisted the 72 sages and planted in their minds the same idea of making changes. That's what it means when it says the Torah was not translated adequately. To adequately translate the Torah means perfectly, literally, word for word. The challenge is that Torah cannot be translated that way because it will cause misunderstandings, which could lead to heresy, like believing that there are two divine powers. This is why the translation of the Torah is compared to the day of the creation of the golden calf. The day of the creation of the golden calf was difficult because it laid the groundwork for the sin of idolatry that took place the next day. Similarly, the day the sages translated the Torah into Greek was a difficult day for the Jewish people because it bore the potential of causing the Torah to be misunderstood and distorted. So this is why the Septuagint is compared to the day of the creation of the golden calf. They both had explosive potential in a negative way. The golden calf maybe didn't come from such a bad place, but it led to idolatry. And the Septuagint could have led, we'll see soon what the could have led means. It could have led to heretical interpretations of the Torah. Now let's move on to the story of Shammai and Hillel. We'll see the same running theme. A dangerous majority, page 10. Says the Rebbe, similarly regarding the day when Hillel sat submissively before Shammai, the actual fact that rulings were issued on that day in accordance with the opinion of Shammai was not the problem. Not a problem. Hillel conceded to Shammai and didn't maintain his disagreement, so the ruling was proper. It was a good ruling. It was kosher. The difficulty was that this had the potential of setting a precedent for ruling in favor of Beit Shammai in the future as well, contrary to the general rule that the opinion of Beit Shammai doesn't count against the opinion of Beit Hillel. So the issue wasn't that the 18 rulings followed Beit Shammai. Even Hillel wouldn't disagree with that outcome. The problem was the potential that it had. Again, explosive potential. That Beit Shammai would achieve permanent dominance in halachic decision making. So what's so bad about that? Said the Rebbe, it is known. Before we go further, I want to make a plug. If you have any questions on today's class, please reach out. Send me an email, rabbi@jewisherie.com, and the phone number 814-315-1344. You should have the stuff written down so you can know how to get in touch. You can also reach out to say hi. I always appreciate a hi. So what's so bad about if the final law always follows with Shammai? It is known that Shammai reflected the divine attribute of Gevura, of severity, while Hillel reflected the attribute of Chesed, of kindness. This is the real reason why Beit Shammai usually rules stringently, while Beit Hillel rules leniently. For this reason, it's where they stem from, where they reflect, and what they personify. Hillel would descend to the level of each individual, and irrespective of their level, he would look at them with kindness. Hillel believed that he needed to descend to any level and express kindness there. Quote, educate the child according to their path, and then, even when they grow old, they will not stray from it. It is Hillel's conduct that sustains the world because he acts kindly. Shammai, by contrast, page 11, Shammai, by contrast, acted in accordance with the attribute of truth, leading him to be more strict and stringent. Such conduct cannot sustain the world. The world can't handle that. Shammai expressed a strict style of ruling, one that was less concerned with the person standing before him and more concerned with the truth, no matter the price. The issue is that the world cannot function in such a fashion. Before Hashem created the world, the attribute of truth said, so to speak, that the world shouldn't even be created. It's false. The world is a world of falsehood. When we follow only the pristine absolute truth, without considering one's circumstances and complicated reality, we leave no room for humans' existence and functioning. This was the major tragedy that day. Not the 18 rulings which were issued, but the potential for Shammai to become the dominant and permanent dictator of the law. Something that would challenge the world's existence and functionality. That's why they compared it to the day the golden calf was made. It too had a problem in terms of the potential results, not necessarily the actual event. Practically, however, says the Rebbe, there were no negative results from the translation of the Torah into Greek, and not either from the day when Hillel sat submissively before Shammai. In this respect, these events differ from the day of the creation of the golden calf. So although the sages compare these events to the day of the golden calf's creation, that they all three had the potential for a negative outcome, the reality is that the golden calf had a negative outcome. The potential was actualized, while these two events, the translation of the Torah into Greek and Hillel sitting submissively before Shammai, did not lead to any negative results. And on the contrary, we'll see in a second, they actually brought to a gain, an advantage, a positive thing. Moreover, we can argue that this Greek translation of the Torah by the 72 sages for Talmud and its editorial changes, starting with translating God created the world in the beginning, rather than the strictly literal translation of in the beginning God created God, brought the message of God's oneness to the nations of the world as well. There was a gain. There was a positive side to what happened. Sure, the act itself had a potential for a catastrophe. Practically, though, it ended up being good. Similarly, when Hillel sat submissively before Shammai, like one of his students, it taught Shammai a lesson, a positive lesson. Not only did it not result in the law being determined in favor of Shammai in general, it even had a subjugative effect on Shammai. This may be the reason why we find a number of instances in which Beit Shammai are lenient. Beit Hillel is almost always lenient. Beit Shammai is almost always strict. We find instances where Beit Shammai is strict, possibly because of this event. Second. Section C. We're almost done. Disseminating Hasidic teachings. That's on page 12 in your book. Mashiach's message to the Baal Shem Tov. In a letter to his brother-in-law, Rabbi Gershon of Kitov, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, describes a time when his soul ascended to heaven on Rosh Hashanah, 1746. Source 6, this is from the book, the holy book, Ben Porat Yosef, which is a compilation of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings, compiled by his students, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polnoye, who is known as the Toldos Yosef. I ascended from level to level until I reached Mashiach's chamber, says the Baal Shem Tov, where he studied Torah from the great sages and with the 7 shepherds. I saw great joy there, and I didn't know the cause of it. I thought perhaps they were rejoicing over my passing from this world, but later they informed me that I had not passed. They took great pleasure in the fact that I was teaching their Torah down below. I still do not understand the reason for this joy. I asked Mashiach, when is the master coming? And he answered me, this will be a sign. When your teachings will spread forth and be revealed, and your well springs spread outwards, in the original Hebrew, your well springs spread outwards, that which I have taught you and you have grasped, then they will also be able to have the effect you have. The negative forces will be nullified, and it will be a time ripe for the redemption. Page 13, the Hasidim cried, says the Rebbe. The story is told that when the instruction was given that the teachings of Hasidus, need to be spread everywhere to all people, Hasidim cried. On the one hand, this spreading of Hasidus is what will bring Mashiach, the greatest good, for the entire world. But on the other hand, it requires that the great secrets of Hasidus be revealed in the public thoroughfare. When my predecessor, says the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, began publishing translations of Hasidic teachings in various languages, there were also people that raised complaints. They asked, how can you take the deepest secrets of the Torah and translate them into foreign languages? English, French, Portuguese, Russian, what is this? Thereby enabling everyone to understand them. These teachings were even published in newspapers, bringing them to the public thoroughfare. So what's the issue? Similar to the fears of the 70 elders, that if the Torah would be translated literally, Talmud would err and think that there are two divine powers, a similar thing could happen when translating and spreading the Torah's secrets. People might misunderstand things, and by that time it would be too late to correct them. That's why the Hasidim cried, and why there was some initial opposition and apprehension to translating Hasidic teachings. The explanation given above is relevant to our case as well. Spreading the teachings of Hasidus is indeed a difficult and risky task. This is why the Hasidim cried, but the result was extraordinarily successful, leading to a great spiritual elevation. The same applies to the translation of Hasidus spearheaded by the previous Rebbe. This was a risky step at the time because it provided even distant people access to these teachings. But we see that it was successful, and it was tremendously successful, and it continues to be successful. The 70 elders, as well as Hillel and Shammai, were fortunate that the dangerous potentials did not materialize, and the actual outcomes were positive. The same happened with the spreading of Hasidus. The Baal Shem Tov and successive Hasidic leaders were successful in teaching the populace, the masses, with positive results and inside joke, by the way, with positive results, and as Mashiach promised, bringing the redemption closer. The lesson we can learn from this is to engage in the spreading of the teachings of Hasidus, even to a person who seems far removed from them. We need to look at such people like Aaron did in his time, seeing the positive potential they have. We need to spread Hasidus to everyone in their own language, and this will lead to the redemption speedily in our time. So let's analyze this lesson for a moment, and let's give another additional possible lessons we can take from this. Teaching and spreading Hasidus to everyone. That you meet another Jew, if you learn something of Hasidus, a Hasidic teaching, any of the basic ones, loving a fellow Jew, that me and you, we share the same soul, we're all one people, one entity, as explained in many different sources in Hasidus. Therefore, I should look at you for who you are at your core, not for what you appear on the outside. If there's something I don't like about you, there's some behavior, something you said, we have to make amends. We have to figure it out. But I still need to love you because of who you are. We're the same people. We're the same person. Or it's an idea that God did not create the world thousands of years ago. God creates the world and recreates it every single moment. And if he were to stop creating it for even a moment, the world would cease to exist completely. Any Hasidic teaching that you learn, that even if it didn't inspire you, especially if it did inspire you, if it touched you, share it with somebody else. Find another Jew and share it with them. You have no idea how it might change their day and their life in a positive way. But also, not only to spread Hasidus, but to be the recipient of the spreading of Hasidus. Learn Hasidus. Make an effort. Go on Chabad.org. Keep listening to these classes. And to integrate the Hasidic teachings into your mind and heart and see the beauty of them, the luster, the shine. It's like I said at a different class once, if you have a fork in the road, there's 3 different ways you can go, or 4 different ways. You can go down one path, another path. There's another way that it's not so clear where to go, which path to go. You can go up. You go in an airplane, you see things from a completely different perspective. When you learn Hasidus, you learn the secrets of the Torah, as explained in Hasidus, it picks you up. It raises you up. You see the world from a completely different perspective, a godly perspective, a lofty perspective, a beautiful perspective. And it shifts your reality. It changes your life. So learn more Hasidus. Another couple possible lessons. about this idea of a potential negative, that by these events, they weren't necessarily bad, but they had potential to lead to something bad. Flipping the opposite way around also. There are some things that aren't necessarily strictly a good thing. They're not strictly a mitzvah. You open up a book of Jewish law, you open up the book of the Torah, the book of the mitzvahs. Is this a mitzvah? Is this something I'm required to do? Not necessarily. But there are things that they have an incredible potential to lead to more mitzvah observance, which of course brings ridiculous blessings into your life. So give a couple examples. These are things that one should do, but they're not necessarily a mitzvah necessarily, but they bring to the greatest blessings and the greatest increase in Jewish observance. Examples. There's plenty of examples. Let's just pick a couple. Moda ani. Who's ever heard of Moda ani? Moda ani is not even a prayer. It's a one-liner. It's a one-liner. It's the first thing a Jew should say in the morning. When your eyes open, before you say hello to anybody, before you check your phone and your Facebook and your Instagram or whatever, before you look at a newspaper, before you even get out of bed. Moda ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam shechazarta bi nishmasi bechemla rabba munasecha. If you have a problem with the Hebrew, you can say it in English. That you're thanking. You can find it in a translation. Maybe I could post it in the description of the YouTube video, a link to the translation. That you're thanking God for returning to you your soul in the morning. You woke up another day alive. You thank God for that. You start your day with gratitude, thanking God for your life. It is not necessarily a mitzvah. At the same time, it contains incredible power. I encourage you to take that on. Another suggestion: discussing with your spouse about increasing mitzvah observance. Try it. You might be surprised what you might learn and gain. Whether it be in the area of kashrut, kosher food, having kosher home, eating kosher foods. Sit down and say, I'd like to talk to you, my dear wife, my dear husband. What are your thoughts about kosher? Maybe we should take on one food that we'll start eating kosher. Maybe we should have one section of the kitchen that we leave strictly kosher. We'll make it kosher and we'll keep it kosher. Such a thing will change your life. It will literally change your life. Try it. I'm not talking about making the kitchen kosher, having a discussion about it with your spouse. Whether it's about kosher, whether it's about tarat hamishpacha, family purity, laws, the marital laws between husband and wife. That brings purity and holiness to the family in general, not just the husband and wife, but to the family and to the home at large. Shabbat observance, keeping Shabbos. Discuss it. Sit down with your spouse and discuss. I'm Jewish, you're Jewish. Let's figure out how can we make our home more Jewish. And as we said earlier, these things, they were potentially bad. The calf led to something bad. The other two didn't. They led to something good. But even the golden calf, there's a rule that Hasidus teaches that every descent, whether at the large, for the Jewish people at large, for the world at large, or for a microcosm, for myself as a Jew, a personal individual Jew, any descent, any crashing down that happens, the truth is, at its core, it's there in order to springboard us to a greater ascent, a greater jump forward and higher. And the golden calf ultimately leads to all positivity and will eventually lead to the coming of Mashiach. May it be speedily today. Have a great night, a great day, and hope you enjoyed the class. Reach out with any questions, please. Sayonara.